Competition used to be the foundation of capitalism. The whole theory was simple. Companies fight for your business. Better products win. Worse products die. Prices stay fair because the moment one company gets greedy, another one undercuts them. That was the promise. That was the system. But if you look at the actual markets people interact with every single day, something is obviously wrong. You already know the feeling. You go to book a flight and 4 airlines control 80% of domestic routes. You shop for a phone plan and 3 carriers split nearly the entire country between them. You search for something online and one company handles 90% of all global searches. You walk into a grocery store and grab products from 12 different brands that are all owned by the same 2 companies. None of this happened by accident. Competition didn't slowly fade away on its own. It was systematically removed, and the companies that removed it had perfectly rational reasons for doing so. This is the story of how modern markets stopped being competitive and why the incentive structures that drive corporate behavior make consolidation almost inevitable. Start with something most people don't immediately see: the illusion of competition. Walk into any American supermarket and the sheer variety on the shelves is staggering. Hundreds of brands, dozens of options in every category. It looks like a competitive marketplace working exactly the way it's supposed to. But look closer. That display of breakfast cereals, a dozen different boxes from brands that feel completely independent, is almost entirely controlled by 2 companies. Kellanova and General Mills together hold a dominant share of the American cereal market. The chips aisle tells the same story. PepsiCo's Frito-Lay division controls roughly 40% of the entire U.S. snack market alone. Ruffles, Lay's, Doritos, Cheetos, Sun Chips, Fritos. Different branding, different flavors, completely different identity in the shopper's mind, same company. The consumer goods industry runs on this model. Unilever and Procter & Gamble together own hundreds of personal care and household brands that appear to compete directly with each other. They share shelf space in ways that look like competition but functionally aren't. The competition is cosmetic. The prices are set by a handful of companies who already know what everyone else in their category is charging. The airline industry makes this even more visible. In 2000, there were over a dozen major U.S. carriers. Competition was fierce, margins were thin, prices were low. The industry was famously unprofitable. Warren Buffett described airlines as a death trap for investors. Then the consolidation began. U.S. Airways merged with America West. Delta absorbed Northwest. United merged with Continental. American Airlines acquired U.S. Airways. By 2015, 4 carriers controlled 80% of domestic U.S. air travel: American, Delta, United, and Southwest. That's it. Prices went up. Bag fees, seat upgrade charges, and change fees became industry standard not because one airline invented them, but because within months of one carrier introducing a new fee, every other carrier matched it. The technical term for this behavior is parallel pricing. You don't need executives in a room conspiring to fix prices. You just need a small enough market with large enough players who are all watching each other. When Delta raises a fee and loses no customers because United raised the same fee the same week, that tells you something important about what competition actually looks like in that industry. Economists call this structure an oligopoly, a market dominated by so few competitors that each one's decisions directly affect the others. And oligopolies behave very differently from competitive markets. In a competitive market, if a company raises prices, it loses customers immediately. Another company undercuts them and takes the business. The discipline of competition keeps prices in check. In an oligopoly, the math changes. If there are only 4 airlines and you're annoyed by American's new fee, your only real alternatives are Delta, United, and Southwest, who will likely introduce the same fee within months. The threat of losing customers to a genuine competitor essentially disappears. So how did so many industries arrive at this point? The answer isn't one thing. It's a convergence of several forces that all push toward the same outcome. The most straightforward driver is mergers and acquisitions. The United States saw over 50,000 mergers between 1998 and 2020. The pace of consolidation accelerated dramatically in the 2000s as cheap borrowing costs made acquisition the cheapest growth strategy available. For large companies, buying a competitor is almost always more efficient than competing with one. If a company has built a successful regional operation, a national player can either try to outcompete them, which costs time, capital, and market share uncertainty, or simply buy them and absorb their customers overnight. The math almost always favors acquisition. Between 2010 and 2019, the 5 largest tech companies made over 400 acquisitions combined. Many of those were small startups that never made headlines. But the effect was cumulative. Every acquisition removed a potential competitor from the market before they became a serious threat. Technology adds a dimension that makes this dynamic even more extreme. In digital markets, the concept of network effects changes the competitive equation entirely. A social network becomes more valuable as more people join it. A marketplace becomes more useful as more buyers and sellers use it. A payment platform becomes more trusted as more merchants accept it. These are self-reinforcing advantages that compound over time and become nearly impossible for a new entrant to overcome. By the time a competitor has built a product that matches the leader's features, the leader already has a user base that the competitor cannot replicate. Google's dominance in search is not purely a product quality story, it's a data story. More searches generate more data, which trains better algorithms, which produce better results, which attract more searches. The cycle runs in one direction. Meta owns 4 of the 6 most used social media applications in the world: Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. A competitor trying to enter social networking doesn't just need a better product. They need to convince hundreds of millions of people to abandon platforms where all their existing connections already are. That is not a product problem. It is a structural problem that no product feature can solve. Scale creates a similar barrier in traditional industries. Amazon's logistics operation took 2 decades and over $200 billion in capital investment to build. A new retailer cannot replicate that infrastructure. They can build a website and offer products, but their shipping costs, delivery speeds, and fulfillment reliability will always trail Amazon's because they lack the volume to justify the same fixed investments. When the largest players in any industry reach sufficient scale, their cost structure becomes a permanent competitive advantage. They can price below what it would cost a new entrant to operate at all and still generate profit. The new entrant never gets started. Not because the large player is hostile, but because the math of the business doesn't work for anyone smaller. Regulatory dynamics compound all of this. Over the past 4 decades, the standard framework for evaluating mergers shifted heavily toward what's called the Consumer Welfare Standard. Under this framework, a merger is only blocked if it demonstrably raises consumer prices in the short term. That sounds reasonable. But the practical effect was that regulators approved enormous consolidations across industry after industry because prices didn't rise immediately, even when competitive pressure was clearly being removed. By the time prices rose years later, the connection to the original consolidation was difficult to establish. The regulatory window for blocking a merger closes long before the full effects of that merger become visible in the market. Now consider the role of investors, because this is where the incentive structure becomes particularly important to understand. Publicly traded companies operate under constant pressure from institutional shareholders who prioritize predictable earnings growth over bold competitive moves. And this creates a specific behavior pattern in corporate strategy. Competition is expensive. Launching a price war costs margin. Investing in R&D to genuinely out-innovate a rival costs capital that doesn't generate returns for years. Running aggressive campaigns to take market share from a competitor means accepting quarters of compressed profits before any revenue materializes. In the short-term framework most public company boards operate under, competition is a liability. Acquisition is an asset. When you buy a competitor, you eliminate a cost center, add revenue, increase market share, and report synergy targets to investors on a predictable timeline. The acquisition model produces the kind of clean, legible growth story that institutional investors reward. The competition model produces years of ugly quarterly numbers on the way to a strategic outcome that may or may not materialize. Activist investors have accelerated this dynamic. When a company's stock underperforms, hedge funds often push for the fastest possible path to earnings improvement. That path is almost never increased competitive investment. It's cost-cutting, asset sales, and strategic consolidation. The investor pressure that once might have rewarded companies for bold long-term positioning has shifted decisively toward reward structures that favor predictable near-term results. And predictable near-term results come from controlling a market, not competing in one. The result of all of this plays out in ways consumers recognize immediately, even when they don't know exactly why things feel the way they do. When industries consolidate down to a small number of dominant players, the immediate competitive pressure that forces companies to improve products and services diminishes sharply. Not because the executives stop caring about customers, but because the structural incentive to invest in product improvement weakens. If you control 30% of the domestic air travel market and your 3 direct competitors have almost identical pricing, service quality, and route structures, the rational calculation is that aggressive investment in customer experience will not meaningfully shift market share. Customers don't switch airlines for loyalty program changes. They switch for price and route availability. And if route availability and prices are structurally similar across all four major carriers, the investment in genuine differentiation doesn't pencil out. So the investment doesn't happen. This is why customers across so many industries have the simultaneous experience of paying more while getting less. Cable and internet service providers represent the clearest example. Roughly 50 million American households have access to only one broadband provider capable of delivering genuinely high-speed service. Not two providers competing. 1. Customer satisfaction scores for internet service providers have ranked at the bottom of American industries for over a decade, lower than the IRS. That's not a coincidence. It's not a management failure at any individual company. It's the predictable outcome of a market structure where competitive pressure has been reduced to near zero. When a company knows its customers can't leave, the return on investment for improving service collapses. The same dynamic explains why prices across consolidated industries tend to rise in ways that seem coordinated without any explicit agreement between companies. Airline ticket prices, prescription drug costs, hospital fees, cable subscription rates. These categories all share a common structure: a small number of dominant players, high barriers to new entry, and customers who have limited realistic alternatives. The prices reflect the structure, not the product quality. In a genuinely competitive market, one company charging more than its costs would immediately lose share to a competitor charging less. In a consolidated market where the competitor is facing the same cost structure and knows they won't gain share by cutting price because the other player will just match them, both companies have more to gain by maintaining prices than by competing on them. This is not conspiracy. This is math. The consequences extend beyond prices into something more difficult to measure but equally real. Innovation slows. The pharmaceutical industry spends more on stock buybacks and dividends annually than on research and development. The logic is straightforward. In a market where the top 10 companies control over 40% of global prescription drug revenue, the expected return on a new drug that might take 15 years and $10 billion to bring to market often compares unfavorably to returning capital to shareholders in the near term. The innovation that created the blockbuster drugs those companies now sell happened in an earlier, more competitive environment where pharmaceutical companies could not survive without continuous product development. The incentive structure has changed. The behavior followed. The telecom sector tells the same story. The United States has significantly slower average internet speeds and higher average consumer prices than countries with more competitive broadband markets. South Korea, which maintained aggressive government investment in infrastructure competition, has average internet speeds that dwarf American averages while charging consumers less. This is not an infrastructure limitation. The fiber optic cable required to deliver high-speed internet to American homes exists. The reason it isn't universally deployed is that in a market with limited competition, the return on that capital investment doesn't clear the bar the consolidated carriers apply to new spending. Understanding this is not about assigning blame to any particular company or any particular set of executives. The people running these consolidated businesses are generally making rational decisions given the incentive structures they operate within. A CEO who chose to absorb years of margin compression in pursuit of long-term competitive investment would face shareholder pressure, activist campaigns, and potentially termination before the strategy had time to produce results. The incentive structures reward consolidation and penalize aggressive competition. The outcomes follow from the incentives. They always do. What that leaves is a modern economy that preserves the surface appearance of competition while systematically removing its substance. The grocery store still has 100 brands. The airport still has 4 airlines. The phone store still has 3 carriers. The market appears diverse. The underlying control structure is narrow, and the mechanisms that once forced companies to compete aggressively for customers, lower prices, and invest in genuine product improvement have been quietly removed, one merger, one acquisition, one regulatory approval at a time. The modern economy still looks competitive, but underneath the surface, most industries are run by just a handful of companies. Competition didn't disappear because capitalism stopped working. It disappeared because the incentives inside modern capitalism stopped requiring it. That distinction matters because if you understand the incentive, you can at least see the system clearly for what it is. What do you think? Have you noticed this pattern in industries you use every single day? Let us know in the comments below. And if this kind of structural analysis is what you're looking for, hit that like button and subscribe to Capital Legends. We cover the systems and incentives that shape the business world every week. Click here to watch our next video.